Welcome back to the next video on circuit protection. So we're going to talk about testing RCDs, and we're going to look at three standards, or two standards and one regulation: AS/NZS 3000, AS/NZS 3760, and ESR 2480 and 81. Rightio, let's have a look at testing fixed RCDs according to AS/NZS 3000. If we look at 2.6.2.2, we'll find that RCDs shall interrupt all phase and neutral conductors when they are protecting medical treatment areas, or if they are installed adjacent to a socket outlet and intend to protect that socket outlet. So we've got to prove in those circumstances that all phase and neutral conductors are being interrupted. And if we have a look at AS/NZS 3008.3.10.2, we'll find that we need to do a test on every final subcircuit to confirm that the designated RCD operates to disconnect that circuit. We're going to go around every final subcircuit and check that the right RCD disconnects that circuit. Then we also need to check the operation of the RCD by, if it is clearly marked as a type A, and here's the marking for type A, there's that little symbol there. If it is clearly marked as a type A, then pushing the test button is what we need to do. If it's not marked type A, then we have to use test equipment to test it. So let's have a look at what the electrical safety regulations say about testing fixed RCDs. ESR 13 says the person doing electrical work must ensure the work is electrically safe and ensure that the fittings, which would include RCDs, are electrically safe. It doesn't say what electrically safe is, but it says what electrically unsafe is, and you can have a look at that in ESR 24. Then if you skip over to ESR 80, it states that every new or used fitting sold or offered for sale or supplied or offered for supply must be electrically safe. And so that covers us if we're Sparkies and we're supplying this equipment to go in as well. If we have a look at ESR 81, a certificate of conformity showing that the fitting complies with AS/NZS 3820 or other standard in Schedule 4 is conclusive evidence that the fitting complies with ESR 80 and is electrically safe. So what that says is, if we are buying equipment and it does have a certificate of conformity with it, then we can use that as conclusive evidence that the RCD is electrically safe, and that we can put it in and test it to AS/NZS 3000. So next is testing the portable RCDs, and we're going to look in AS/NZS 3760, and we're also going to look in Appendix H of that standard to find out what we need to do in testing portable appliances. So what does it say there? It says that we need to suddenly apply a phase to earth trip current with something like a push button, and that when we do that, the tripping time shall not exceed those in Table 3. And here's Table 3. If we've got a Type 1 RCD, which only requires 10 milliamps to trip, it's got to do it within 40 milliseconds. And if we've got a Type 2 RCD, which requires 30 milliamps to trip, when we put 30 milliamps on it, it should trip in less than 300 milliseconds. So we've got to prove that when we're testing portable RCDs, that it actually does that. If the RCD is fixed to equipment terminals, then just a push button is required, and as long as it trips in a timely fashion, then it's deemed to be okay. If we've got three-phase RCDs, which are in industry and around the place, we need to test that it trips on each phase. So if you were going to test an RCD with an instrument, how would you do it? There's a flow chart here that you need to look at and study. You might even want to pause the video and have a look through this. Make sure you understand it. So you're going to disconnect the load through the RCD. You don't want that affecting your tests. You're going to plug the tester instrument into the furthest socket away from the supply if you're testing socket outlets in a house, for instance. Then you set the tester to the correct tripping current, which would be 30 milliamps or 10 milliamps depending on the RCD, and a phase angle of 0. You test it by pressing the test button or however the meter works, and check that it trips between 40 milliseconds or less than 40 milliseconds for a type 1 and less than 300 milliseconds for a type 2. You can set the phase angle then to 180 degrees and test again. Check those times again, and also don't forget to push the test button on the RCD to make sure it works correctly. Precautions while testing RCD circuits. Some RCDs can be damaged by insulation resistance testers, and if you have to do something like an insulation resistance test on a circuit that is protected by RCDs, you need to keep an eye out for one of these warning labels or something similar. If you find one, or if there's an RCD on the circuit and you're not sure about it, then disconnect the RCD before testing, especially if you're testing between phase and neutral. Or if you don't have to test between phase and neutral, you're just going to test phase and neutral together to earth, that should be okay, because you're not going to have any current. If you're connecting phase and neutral together, you're not going to have any current flowing through the circuitry from phase to neutral. But the rule is, if in doubt, take it out. You don't want to blow it up. So what if you're testing a circuit that really needs to stay alive and it's protected by an RCD? What if it's a life support circuit, or it's manufacturing and there's processes going on, there's computers being used in files, important files that don't need to be corrupted, lifts and safety equipment? Well, you'd use a tester that wouldn't trip the RCD, that's for sure. And if you don't have one, or if you can't guarantee that, well, you wouldn't attempt the test. Then you'd have to arrange a time that you can come back and test the circuit, and it doesn't matter if it gets tripped, or you might even disconnect it so that you can do the tests. It might be a test that you can't do live, so you've got to be sensible in these situations and think about how you can get around that. That brings us to the end of this circuit protection video on testing RCDs.